Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. You're tuned in to Wild Podcast. By all means, go to wowpodcast.me. That's wowpodcast.me. Now, today we have a special guest. We have MJ Preston. He's here to talk to us about his latest book, 4. MJ, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So let me ask you something, because I kind of bring everybody onto the podcast to just get that wow factor. What was that wow moment when you realized that, hey, I want to be a writer?
Oh, I think that was probably about 11 years old. That's really when I started writing, was when I was young. Wasn't much good at math or social studies or any of the other, science, history, all that. But I really did enjoy story writing when I was young. So that was, I think, probably about 11 years old.
Gotcha. So let's talk about your latest book, 4. Tell me a little bit about that book.
Okay, well, 4 it was just published just recently with WildBlue Press, and it is the follow-up to a book called Highwayman, these two books are like their companion books. And the first book, Highwayman, was published last July. And these two books tell one story, and the first book, which Highwayman is about the rise of a serial killer. So it follows him kind of like he's the protagonist in the story more than the antagonist, but he is the antagonist. Make no mistake. So it follows him in like a slow burn. We build it up over 8 years of this serial killer, how he's born and how he advances and gets better, and the things he does. And he starts killing people all over the United States, and the FBI can't figure it out if the guy's a truck driver or they just don't know. They don't know how he's getting from one end of the United States to the other. So he may kill somebody in California this week, and then in 2 weeks he'll kill somebody in Central Falls, Rhode Island. And at any rate, so that's what the whole first Highwayman book is about. He gets on the FBI's most wanted list. The second book, 4, follows, because obviously our bad guy gets away in the first book, and that's, if you're going to read both books, there's no surprise there. But the second book, 4, is where our bad guy, Lance Bellinger, and he's the Highwayman. He gathers 3 other assailants through the internet, and they massacre people in Pittsburgh in their homes. And so basically the second half of the book is they know who the Highwayman is, and this is the rundown. They're chasing him. And without giving, any spoilers or anything like that, but there's lots of fun, lots of action, lots of mayhem. It really is a very dark thriller set of books. And when I say Highwayman series, these 2 books conclude that story. The next book I am writing is going to have characters from those first 2 books, but it'll be a completely different story.
I'm curious, how do you take yourself into that dark place to write these stories?
Well, I've always kind of been there. I started out as a horror writer, and my first book was a straight horror, and the second book I wrote was a science fiction horror. So I've always kind of liked playing around in these dark places. I don't think I'm built as a writer to be to write great American literature, for lack of a better term. I like these dark places because you can do things there that you can't do in a conventional story. And when you're talking, in one sense, you're talking about supernatural with my first 2 books, or extraterrestrial. I mean, you can have a ball with that, and that's the whole point of it. Is a dark story or a horror story is it's a fun ride, or what would you call it? It's like getting on a roller coaster at a carnival, right? You ride it until the end, and then when it's over, you go, wow. And if it scares you, or if it makes your heart pound, that's great. So just in a roundabout way to answer your question is that I've always been attracted to monsters. So my first book was about a skinwalker, which was a native monster. My second book was about bone-eating aliens. And these 2 books are about monsters as well. But these are real monsters. And that makes them more terrifying than any other monster I think you could make up, because they really walk among us.
So you've had a very interesting career job choice. I've noticed that you've done some things with ice trucking. So how did you find the time to write 4 novels while doing ice trucking?
Well, it's a really you really have to manage your time. Generally, I mean, you have to be dedicated to what you do until somebody, you can actually start sustaining yourself to the point you don't have to do these other jobs. But I would get up at 5 a.m. in the morning or sometimes 4 in the morning and just work a deadline. Like when I wrote Highwayman, and they published it in July of last year, I was working on 4 at that time, and the publishing house called me up and said, "Hey, so when's 4 going to be done?" And I was a third of the way into it, so I had to really manage my time very well. So like I say, I get up very early in the morning. I dedicate so much time on the weekends, and sometimes I'm at it at night, but mostly morning is my routine.
So let me ask you this. I kind of want to go back to it because I'm so interested because I always wanted to write a thriller mystery. Is there some type of a detox that you have to do after you write a chapter or 2?
No, I don't think so much a detox. I think you have to separate yourself from it. But I mean, when I was researching for these books, because they're about a serial killer, and I tried to make these characters as real to true life, like I didn't want them to have. I didn't want them to be a Dexter Morgan or a Hannibal Lecter. I didn't want them to be likable, and so that means reading a lot of really, really bad stuff. I read one of the books that I read, The Man with the Candy by Jack Olson, which talks about child murder, and there's some really ugly stuff you have to look into. So sometimes you got to pull back from that and kind of take a breath, because some of it is really dark. And then you have to decide, what am I going to, if I'm going to use something like this in my story, where do I go, where do we go from it being entertainment to exploitation? And, I'm a believer that, you don't show I'm not a gore hound. So even though there might be something gory in one of my books, the idea is that I put that into the reader's mind where I'll close the door and what's going on behind the door, but I'm not really showing you what's going behind the door. Okay. But you bloody well know what's going on behind the door. So I try to do that, but from a writing point of view, I don't really have to shake it off. But certainly the research, all of the stuff I did, definitely had to shake it off.
What do you think draws people to stories about serial killers?
It's a strange thing. There seems to be a bit of a resurgence right now too. I think that maybe the exact same thing that draws me to them is that they're monsters, and it just doesn't make sense why one person would want to go out and hunt other humans and what their mindset is and what it is. But we certainly are drawn to them, and I that's the only thing I can think is that why do we slow down and look at a car accident? Why do we do all these things? Because it's eerie to us, but we also have kind of a dark fascination with it, I think.
So what's next for MJ Preston?
Well, we're going to continue rotating on these books because I say it's in the last year I've published 4 books. My publisher, WildBlue Press, picked up my 2 independent books as well. So we're out there pumping these, but I'm working on a new novel, and it's for the Highwayman series. And I got a nice juicy horror novel on the tape there too. I'm thinking about, but first I got to finish this next Highwayman book.
Gotcha. So let's tell everybody where they could purchase your books and how they can contact you through social media.
Absolutely. Okay, so they can get me on the web at mjpreston.net. Okay, and it's all lowercase. That'll get you to everywhere. However, you can find me on Amazon. I have an Amazon page. You can find me on Facebook. I'm a very open person with readers. So you want to come and friend me, and as long as you're not a 20-year-old girl in 19 stages of undress and I know you're not a bot from Russia, I'll take you on as a friend. No problem at all. I'm an open guy like that. And you can find me on Twitter and all other social medias, or go to the WildBlue Press website, which is wildbluepress.com, and you can check me out there.
Well, you're listening to Wild Podcast. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. We're talking to author MJ Preston about his latest book, 4. It's a part of the Highwayman series. It's actually book number 2. MJ Preston, thank you so much for coming on to Wild Podcast.
Well, listen, thank you for having me.